Hello, and welcome to Sit Down with Sifu on a Thursday. Hello, Thursday. So, welcome to Sit Down with Sifu, the show where anything can happen. I normally throw some invites out to a few people and see who turns up. We've got a friend of mine coming today, hopefully. I think I see him now. Let's just throw him out an invite. Here we go. He sent me one. We may have that thing where we both do it at the same time. So, there we go. Hello, my friend. How are you doing?
Doing good. How are you doing, my brother?
Not too bad. Not too bad. I think the last time we spoke, I spent a lot of time on the seas just over there. It's about 25, 30
Yeah.
foot away. So I'm still quite close to the sea, but I now have this little alcove that I have found. There's two sides. One side's brick wall, the other side's got like a sort of like this sort of a feature normally there, but the wind's down here today. So this is the slightly less windier side. So instead of Castle Boggy, I'm at Brick Wall Boggy's place. So it's a little bit different. But anyway, it's great to see you. More importantly, how have things been with you?
It's going well. I can't really complain. Taking one day at a time, going with the flow.
That's always a good thing to do. Good thing to say. It's going with the flow. I don't know, actually, because this is sort of like a little different, the whole sit down with seafood, it's whatever we really want to talk about. So, what have you been up to in the last couple of months since I spoke to you last?
So first off, I would like to talk a little bit about a book that I published. It's called Trauma to PTSD: Root Causes. Got that upside down. Root Causes to Healing Branches. It's the same book. It's the same thing. The only difference really is just the cover, in terms of the color of the cover. So the idea behind the book Trauma to PTSD, it's really bringing more awareness to the topic of PTSD. A lot of times, we sort of overlook a lot of simple things that are actual traumas in our life and increase our risk of potentially developing PTSD later on in life. So the goal of the book is really to bring awareness to a lot of different topics like that. I also go through talking about different ways to work with PTSD and sort of to empower yourself. A lot of times people try different types of therapy, especially in the whole mental health realm. They would try certain therapies and then they would just give up because it didn't work for them. And another feature of the book is really trying to bring awareness to that aspect of it as well. It's important to sort of find something that works for you and know that there's help and there's opportunities and potentials to overcome whatever obstacles is on the way.
Do you think PTSD is more known, more understood now? Like, say like a year ago, a couple of years ago, is it? Because I get, like, the whole point of the book is to bring awareness, but it's interesting that like certain things are suppressed, or so we would dismiss certain things, and is it now? Do you think that we are getting more aware, or or the reason that the book is to make it, still even more aware? If that makes sense.
I think a combination of both. I think people are definitely becoming more aware of the topic of trauma and PTSD, especially considering everything that is going on now. I would say 2020 was the year that I would call the perfect storm for the amount of different things that was going on all at once. And then 2021 happened, and who knows what 2022 will bring for us. But I do think that there are a lot of people are becoming more and more aware of simple things that are be in trauma in their life or has been trauma in their life. And now with everything that is going on with the virus and the whole mandatory vaccination and whatever, people are realizing some of the things that they've struggled with in the past, they could make a connection to what is going on now and the effects of things that are mandatory or being sort of out of a job because of COVID or because of mandatory vaccines or going into lockdown and all of these different things. It's an additional stressor, but it also gives people a reminder of some of the stresses they may have been through in the past, not to this extent, but definitely to a smaller extent in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, when I left school in 1986, I did a lot of open university, which originally this was before computers were a big thing at all. So it was all like online. I did actually psychology, and I was very much interested in mind and how things worked that way. And there is a lot about certain behaviours, and there is with trauma that certain people will have traumatic things in their past, and it leaves a trigger, and like a small thing would they would explode, and people go, oh, they're out of that person's out of order, they're going, they're acting inappropriately, for the situation. But it's this whole idea of these traumas, and again, I mean, it is this. It is. I find that a very interesting thing in it's a little bit like for me, like phobias. Is the thing with a phobia is like somebody would see the reaction to a phobia being over extreme, but this whole idea with the traumatic incidences or situations that can lead them to react in a certain way. Is there a way with people who have dealt with trauma? Are there telltale signs? Are there ways to sort of recognise that somebody may be dealing with something that they're trying to bury or trying to hide, for instance?
So one of the first things you would notice is there's always a change in personality, and the change of personality could vary from someone going to becoming more reserved or to being overexpressive. Sometimes people would cry out for help in strange ways without realizing that's what they're doing. And we are designed, humans are designed for survival. So we would kick in our survival mechanism to do what we need to do in order for us to survive. So sometimes we would change our personality to reflect something that we desire, but we may not always be able to necessarily speak it out or say it out. So sometimes things that you would look for is, again, the change in personality in terms of somebody being more reserved or somebody being more aggressive, you could say, or more risk-taking. Sometimes that could be a sign of someone being exposed to trauma. And again, it really depends on the severity of the trauma, would depend on which way that they go, and the type of trauma as well. Sometimes it's a simple thing as they would just shut out everybody. Sometimes they would try being drawn towards certain people more than others because they find a degree of comfort with that type of trauma. So an example would be with the military. And I was also ex-military as well. So I'm talking from a little bit of personal experience when it comes to this aspect of it. But a lot of times you would see guys who would go on deployment and would be exposed to certain things. They would come back home and then they would want to go back into those types of situations. And then the reason for that is because within being exposed to a severe amount of trauma, or even sometimes small amount of trauma, you develop a comfort because you have to relive that situation over and over. And as a result, you find comfort, or what I call comfort in trauma. And as a result of that, whenever you take yourself out of that situation, you would sort of desire going back into that situation because you now no longer feel what is normal. So it makes it difficult for an individual in that situation. So they continue to seek it out. The comfort and trauma also happens with people who grew up in abusive homes or grew up in or live in abusive relationships. You see, they go from one abusive relationship to another, and it's the same idea. It's they don't realize that the reason they got out of one relationship because it's abusive, but they jump into another one that is abusive because they find a degree of comfort within that. It's more common to see it happening with people who grew up in abusive homes where they would do that type of pattern, and it's called like the cycle of abuse. So you either become an abuser as you grow older, or you seek out abusive relationship because you don't want. It's either you don't want the same thing to happen to you, so you go to the extreme opposite, or you do continue in that same cycle of being abused because of that comfort that you found from doing it. And the comfort, again, it's just because of survival mechanism. So you get stuck in that fight or flight, and until you recognize that that is what is going on, it's difficult to sort of make that change.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, well, my own personal, as a kid, I was bullied very much as a kid, and fortunately, fortunately, at the similar sort of time, I started actually doing martial arts. But with me, martial arts was actually more, or what from martial arts I actually enjoyed and loved was meditation. The original martial art I did, Katina, which is now kicks, so it's still about. It had part of it was a meditation, and that was the side I really hooked on and really loved. And then I went into qigong, and it was an interesting thing that that my teacher would very much confront. Well, it would show the patterns of trauma, or show the whole idea of what's happening. So that it wouldn't affect. And one of the ways they did that, which a lot of people don't understand, is they actually one of my Sifus, his philosophy was like if you ask too many questions, if you don't practice enough, if you do something that's deemed as wrong, you get hit, you get punched. Now everybody hears, "Oh, terrible!" But the first thing he taught you to do was how to take the punch. Was when you learn to take the punch, and you actually realise that pain only hurts if you in a certain. He actually helped me. He actually helped me to understand how to go. This person can't hurt me anymore because what you're doing. Doesn't no longer affect me in that way, and therefore psychologically, you therefore no longer have power because or at least the bully idea is that is that it's not really the violence; it's about the control. They're trying to control and manipulate you, and they normally do that through some sort of violence or some sort of action, like a robber has the knife to threaten you, so for you to hand over the wallet or your purse, because that's their advantage. I have an advantage over you. As soon as that means nothing to you, if you look at them and then stab it, and you do that in a certain way, then what's going on? And it was an interesting psychology to actually understand that a lot of people, they're using these certain actions to create, to gain power, whether it's, but it's all about power and control. And when you actually learn, well, that's your outcome, and you're using this to get it, you then sidetrack that by going wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it actually does. And so in my book, I actually have a section that talks about, let me see if I find it. So reactant versus respondent, and that comes back to what you were saying. It's all about control, and when we react, we pretty much give up control. So a reaction is just an uncontrolled version of responding. If you're responding, you actually have control of what is going on. You actually could rationalize what is going on. So, for example, like you mentioned with being bullied, it's like if you keep reacting to them, it's like you give control to them. I've talked to a couple of people about this. It's like when you get angry with somebody, you're actually reacting and you're just giving up control to them. And now they could utilize that to their ability or to their advantage. Sorry. So it's important to understand where, like you mentioned, reacting is not necessarily a good thing. It's an autopilot thing, but if you could control that and you could respond to something, then you could actually be more in control. You prevent yourself from going into fight or flight and getting stuck there. Yeah.
And that really goes into this interesting thing, like within not just these, but other faiths as well, but especially Taoism and Buddhism, where their idea not reacting to the emotional situation, allowing yourself to detach to a certain degree, and that whole idea. And I've done this in certain situations where somebody wants me to react in a certain way, and I'm just going, and just carry on talking. Or one of my friends used to say, it's Boggy's, Boggy's in a hurricane and he's walking like it's a Sunday afternoon in the park. So you're confronted with a violent situation. I have been, and it's like, that's not doing anything, and it's like, and you can see, or at least I used to watch their brains. You could go to them, this is not making sense. You're supposed to do this. Why are you doing this? And they lose control, and they lose it flips over, and it's this really interesting thing. And it was one of the things like that. I think I've had 40 years of martial arts and the evening and everything else. But one of my favourite things, it was my own martial art for a while, but the name never stuck. But Bogido was all about humour. It was all about that. If I can make, maybe not you, but if all the people around you on your side, if I make them laugh, then you've got no power, because when your own crew of the own people around you are even against you, as in they're now laughing with me. It takes away. So using humour to actually, and psychology to actually defeat the situation, and it's an interesting thing of. I mean, I don't know if have you ever read the book Celestine Prophecies?
I haven't, no.
Right, so Celestine Prophecies is all about emotional plays, the certain emotion, and they talk about it in a spiritual, energetic way. But they say that there's basically four main plays. There's intimidator, so somebody obviously pushing themselves onto you. Interrogator, I don't like the way I don't like that shirt on you. I don't like the blue wall behind you, that sort of thing. Then you've got the poor me. It's like, oh, it's so windy here, I can hardly hear you. Oh, all the ones. And then you've got aloof, and the whole way. So aloof is like, how are you, Bobby? Is there something wrong? And getting people to dig more and more. And the whole idea is that we actually, as beings, we play these different levels of that game, these different characteristics, to actually gain power from each other. And whether you see it that way or even see it in psychology, you do see people playing emotional games, especially in arguments, desperately trying to win that situation or that argument, or trying to one better. And so that whole thing with Buddhism and Taoism, especially this philosophy of detachment, is when you can stand back and you can breathe, and you can, if you breathe calm and smooth and fluid, then your actions, your thoughts, your emotions become calm and fluid. And the whole idea is when you detach from that situation, then it won't escalate, too much like one way or another. If that makes sense.
it makes sense, and an escalation will only continue to happen if there's two going back and forth. Because if there's no going back and forth, there's no need to escalate the situation. And like I've heard, like often people talk about in an argument, if you just stay quiet, the other person's going to eventually get to the point where they just wouldn't say anything, because if they don't have anything to respond to or to react to, then they just give up on continuing to escalate the situation. And that was something that they taught us when I was a resident assistant in college, that you have to be able to not contribute into escalating a situation. If you continue to stay calm, at some point that other person would realize that they're the one that actually losing control. When you give up your control to them, they could continue to escalate the situation, and then that's when usually things go bad.
Yeah, especially, and there's this interesting thing. So, like back in the 90s, I did hypnosis, studied hypnosis, and also studied NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And it's the whole idea of mirroring as well. So like if somebody, if somebody being very aggressive, but you keep yourself calm and smooth, but you sort of like, if they're scratching their head like you scratch your head, and you start mirroring that person, they start then copying you, and then as long as you can maintain that calmness, they will then, they can then come down to that level. And it's that, it's that whole idea of I think there's an there's a whole thing of most conscious people, conscious beings live in an unconscious way. What does that mean? Is that our whole idea is they're affected far more by their emotions and far more by old programs than they are actually by independent thought and thinking, rather than processing that situation. You tend to go into old habits or old, triggers. And that's that interesting, go back to like the trauma, is that, there's an interesting one I remember studying years ago of with trauma. If somebody's had a trauma in their childhood or in their youth or teenage years, is that they at certain traumatic times, if they had, say, something happened that was very traumatic when they were 14, even when they're 40 years old, at certain traumatic times, they'll almost act like a 14-year-old again, because it's their brain going back to that plateau. Does that make sense?
It definitely does. And like you said, that connection to going back and forth, it's something that even when you're working with clients with PTSD, it's something that you have to help them to identify. Because a lot of times they don't make that connection. Eventually they have to make that connection on their own with a little bit of guidance and sometimes a little bit of push. But once they're able to make that connection and able to break that connection, then they prevent themselves from going into that cycle back and forth. So sometimes I have my patients either use writing or journaling and then think back to like the first situation when X, Y, or Z has happened, or X, Y, like first think of the first instant that made you angry or the first instant that made you sad, depending on what emotion that individual is showcasing the most. And then once they start doing that, they build back to their original story. And in my book, I talk about something called like the magnet effect, where there's one trauma that happens in your life that pretty much becomes a magnet for you. And then until you actually release that, you continue to pull in that type of negative and trauma experiences because of that, because you haven't actually allowed yourself to process the effects of it. It's not your fault because you didn't necessarily understand what is going on, or you hold on to it without realizing that is what you're doing. Once you're able to tap into that aspect of it, or so, like the example you use, tap into that 14-year-old self and say, look, we need to let go of this. We need to move on from here. Then and only then truly you see a significant change in somebody who has been through some degree of trauma, who has been suffering with PTSD for a long time.
What's the? I mean, with people, if themselves, they may not know, or they know that they react. You someone often, but you sometimes hear people sort of say, "I don't know what came over me," like they react in a certain way, and then so it's sort of almost like a trance, and then wake up and go, "I don't know what came over. What happened?" Is there a way, what's the best sort of things to do that if you sort of think that there's something in the past that's affecting you, or that you have moments where you seem to lose control? Is there, what's the best way to sort of deal with this? What's the best way to sort of work these things out and help yourself sort of recover from?
So the honest answer is there's no best way um, for general answer, but everybody has their own best way to do it. And how I work with my clients or patients, I have them find something that they like doing or they enjoy doing and have them utilize that to help them break that connection between the trauma and their current situation. So utilizing things like writing, art, music, whatever that they like. Some people like talking, so they talk out until they get whatever they need to get out. Um, Once you're able to get to that main point, you're able to let go of a lot of things easier. Also, just by somebody being able to identify, okay, this is what is going wrong, or be able to triggers, it helps them a lot in order in the future to sort of break that cycle from going back into fight or flight and getting stuck there. So what I tell my patients to do is make a connection to their most recent situation that they lost control in, and then think back to a previous situation where they've lost control in. Or if you could think of the very first situation that you've lost control in, or that first traumatic event, think back to that, connect your five senses to it. So what do you remember seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, and touching during that aspect of that time, and then correlate it to the most current event. And when you figure out the overlap there, it allows you to figure out what could be potential triggers. And triggers would vary from, some people may have one trigger and some people may have 10 triggers. So a lot of time it's in that five senses that there's some degree of connection. So for example, a common trigger for um, military personnel is the sound of fireworks. Again, it's a sound, and you identify that sound making a connection to your initial exposure, and then making a connection to future or present sound effects. Same thing with smell. Sometimes the smell of something burning might create a trigger. And again, it's a correlation to sense. So utilizing that aspect of it and connecting each one of the senses to the original event and the most recent event allows you to help figure out those triggers. Once you're able to figure out those triggers, then you know that, okay, when I'm exposed to a trigger, then the next step is figuring out what are your reaction towards that trigger, the uncontrolled reaction, that is. So say every time you hear fireworks, your first instinct is I start cold sweating, or I start feeling my heart racing, or something like that. Before you actually get into full panic mode, there are slight things that would start changing that you may notice before. And it's a lot of it, it's just bringing self-awareness to your situation. It takes a little bit of time to figure it out. But once you figure it out and you say like, okay, when I'm exposed to fireworks, I feel this anticipation, or I feel this slight burning sensation in my chest before the heart palpitation comes on, then you know that as soon as you start feeling that burning sensation, it's like, okay, I need to do something to calm myself down. Then that is you identifying the trigger and you identifying what is your reaction to the trigger. So once you can identify those two things, next you need to figure out what do you typically do as an individual to keep you calm. Listen to music, breathing exercises, qigong, tai chi, just get up for a walk, exercise, talk to somebody, call a friend, whatever it is that would allow you to feel calm in that moment, that's when you utilize those things. So again, it goes back. You have to figure out those different things on different levels, figuring out the trigger, your reaction to your triggers, and then what are typical things that you could use to calm yourself. The more you practice it, it's the easier it is to one, identify when it's coming up, and two, to implement whatever is that relaxation technique that you have. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. And well, you know, with what I do, so the whole thing of like Tai Chi in the Taoist way is like the yin and the yang. Is that, you know, is that you've got one thing you need to equalize it with, you know, with something else. So, you know, if or at least with like the NLP techniques, like you sort of say, like the five senses, is that whole idea of if one thing's coming, like if you want to override that with like calmness or override that with like positivity, is that in the NLP or the triggers of what we used to do was like say focus times that would make you really calm, or focus times that you were most in control, and then like pull your ear, touch your nose, or tap your head, and create a trigger to so like in like for public speaking, is like going in public speaking, you feel really nervous. Well, you know, we would beforehand we would create a trigger where you know, to make you more calm. You know, think of all the times that you're calm, do the qigong, which helps you make you more calm, and then create a trigger on something. So, because often sometimes you see me do this, or it's certain little triggers that I have of creating certain things, or helping me focus, or helping me, and that was the whole thing in NLP even, which is to, you know, trigger, you know, the not so positive stuff, the negative stuff is created by a trigger, so you can counter it with another trigger, and, you know, equalize it out. Is that, you know, or at least in a Taoist viewpoint, is balancing one off with the other, so you know, neutralize. If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I do like, and I do like that aspect of balance. And again, it's one distraction to create. I mean, to protect yourself from another distraction. And I do like the point you made there with NLP. It's actually something that I recently started looking into and learning more about. And it's a very, I would not say I'm an expert in it, but from what I've learned so far, I think it's definitely something useful for a lot of people, especially people dealing with trauma and PTSD and stuff like that. So once I'm done with that complete training, then I could give more feedback on it. But I do think it's a helpful tool, and it does. There's a lot of things with NLP that overlaps with other types of therapies and stuff like that. So regardless of what, there's always these overlaps that you can see with so much of different things. And again, that goes back to the point I was making in the beginning, where a lot of times people with various mental health issues, they go and they seek out one type of therapy and it didn't work for them, and they just completely give up, when there is actually so much other options that you could utilize or try. And the idea is you finding what works best for you, or what is most ideal for you. It has to be something that you could connect to.
Yeah, definitely. I think all, you know, I mean, you'll always hear from my mouth, Tao, you know, the Taoist perspective, the Taoist way, and I find it very, so within the Taoist perspective, instead of opposing opposites, we talk about complementary opposites. And then we talk about, which used to get me in trouble 20, 30 years ago, saying there is no good or bad, there just is. And you know, because people say, yeah, but what about this and what about that? But when you actually understand that everything's actually information and process, I think with a lot of people with, you know, overcoming trauma or overcoming situations, is that they think that they have this feeling or this past program there of, you can't do it straight away, or if it's not working, you're a failure. It's not working. You haven't. You teach me something and I can't do it. It's not working for me. Then it's wrong. And what you very rightly said at the beginning, there is no one way of doing this. There is no one way of helping yourself. There are so many different variations. And the point is that you don't see things as right and wrong. See things as, try something else, try it a different way. Allow yourself that forgiveness, allow yourself that time to figure out how it works for you, or best works for you, if that makes sense.
So I could use myself for an example. When I came back from deployment, I had my struggles of readjusting to civilian life, and I went in for therapy. My first thing was talk therapy. I went for, I would say, a couple months before I decided, you know what, I don't feel like this works for me. So instead of just completely stopping, I switched and I was like, all right, try somebody else. And then eventually I probably switched 4 or 5 times before I met one doctor. And one day after one of our sessions, we were just having like a casual conversation, and I mentioned to her that I actually really like writing, and it's something that I've always used in the past to sort of help me process and get things out of my mind. And she was like, well, there's something that I recently learned called written exposure therapy, if it's something that you would like to try. And I was like, sure, why not? I've already been trying this whole talking situation for so long. Why not give something else a try? And then when I tried that, I realized that it was helpful. And it was a lot more helpful than me just talking. The talk therapy was definitely beneficial. Like, I felt I was able to get certain things out. But again, my personality is, I would say, more of a reserved personality. I don't necessarily come out and speak everything out up front. I could talk to you for an hour for our session, definitely, but I may not necessarily get to what I want to get to and get it out very quickly. So a lot of times you get, and with those time session, it's like at minute 50, there's like, all right, we got 10 minutes to wrap up. And then you feel like, all right, well, I'm ready to bring something out. And then the therapist or the doctor says, well, we only got 10 minutes more. Let's just wrap it up and we'll pick up where we left off. It doesn't always work that way. You can't always pick up where you left off because you felt comfortable only at that point in the session. When you have to restart the session, you have to get back to that comfortable point. With the writing, it was a lot easier because then I could just write whatever I want and it gets things out a lot more. So I've noticed, like, when my drives back home, I leave the session during the talk therapy ones, I leave the session feeling good, and by the time I get home, I'm back to square one. When I started doing the writing therapy, it's then when I started noticing more significant difference. It's like I get home, I can carry on with my day, or I have like a complete crash where it's like I actually feel wiped out in terms of like completely drained, and then I take a nap or I take a good sleep, and then I wake up and I'm like, oh wow, I actually feel good about what I just did. And that is what started making me understand more that it's really the individual has to find what works best for them. And what works best for one person may not work best for another person. And what works best for one situation may not necessarily be the best approach for a second situation, even with the same individual. So it's interesting always to don't just give up because one thing didn't work. It's like try to find what works for each individual situation, more or less.
Yeah, 100%. It is a very, I find it a very interesting thing. We have this thing of, I've heard it a lot where somebody said, I'm not fixable. You can't fix me. Nobody can help me. And it's like, no, you just haven't found the right way to help you, or you haven't found what helps you. And I found, as you say, a very interesting thing in what I do, such as like Qigong, is in the East, it's a martial art, it's a medical art, self-healing art, meditation art. But I've done the exercises with people, and I've had people. Well, I say not everybody, but I've had people who have turned around either like once, and they've burst into tears or something, and I said, are you okay? Talk about the situation or anything, and they've actually gone and said that just working for them, the physical exercise and the breathing actually was there for them, their therapy. It helped them deal with that situation, and like the whole thing of like Darris life coaching or just life coaching. In China, it's not called Darris life coaching; it's called life coaching, or just talking. But the whole idea is it's using the same techniques. In actual fact, like with NLP, I actually say NLP. Well, it's the Western version of Taoist life coaching, the Western version, and it's this understanding of talking to people the right way or doing the right things. Because sometimes, Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same tools that created it. So sometimes a problem is solved for a totally different way. If it's something that was very very verbal, it could be something totally physical like dancing or just breathing meditation that can fix it. But like you say, the most important thing is that you have to try things, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's like otherwise it's sort of like saying you eat something and you don't like pickled herring. That's it. I'm giving up food. I can't find a food right for me. Try something else. Eat something else. So it's this whole idea of we on certain things we know to try other things, but the certain things like with traumas or with issues, we seem to think if something doesn't work, nothing's going to work. It's never going to work. And though I know, or for me personally, I understand that that's a self-defense mechanism trying to protect you from getting through that trauma and getting through that situation. That's part of your subconscious mind saying, no, you're best as you are. Stay here in the dark. Stay here in this closed-off space, rather than because that hurts. That's pain. Least it, let it go. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like that comfort and trauma. You create that comfort and that trauma. So you tried something once and it's like, well, I guess I'm comfortable enough with my trauma. That didn't work, so I could stay where I am. And you get so comfortable with that situation that I'm like, okay, I'm not willing anymore to try anything else. Why would I try something I tried already? It didn't work. And you just keep repeating that type of trauma and being stuck in that fight or flight for a very long time. And again, it's not until either somebody pushes you into understanding something differently or trying something differently, then you would really be able to overcome whatever trauma or PTSD that you've been affected by.
Indeed. So your book, we'll have to get you to send me the IBS number or send me the name. We'll put it down when we've done the live. This will come up. Make sure you put your book title in there for us to look for it. And is it get it anywhere online? Get it Amazon? Where's it available?
So www.traumatoptsd.com. It's the easiest way to find it online. You could either get it as a hard copy in the US or Canada. Everywhere else, it's accessible as an ebook on Amazon. Until I figure out a way to get it shipped everywhere else. It was published in the US, so it's easiest to get it shipped there. Or if someone who's listening happens to be in Trinidad, then you could get it directly from me. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good excuse to go. Come to Trinidad.
Come to Trinidad. There you go.
So, well, it's great chatting to you. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we sort of wrap it up?
As we go into the new year, I want to wish everybody a happy new year, happy holidays. One of the things that I plan on doing in the new year, it's repeat a program that I did a couple of weeks ago called Forgive to Freedom Challenge. It's a 7 days program. It's a free event, so anyone who's interested could just either send me a message on Instagram or I guess I would you could email me at universal380@gmail.com to connect with me about that program. Basically, what it is, it's utilizing different steps in order to work on forgiveness. Forgiveness is one way of overcoming trauma, and when it comes to forgiveness, there's different aspects of forgiveness. There's the aspect of receiving forgiveness and actually forgiving somebody. So the program talks about both aspects of it. What would be different from the first time that we did it to this time would be I'd be including different types of things. So just like we talked about utilizing different types of therapies to work with PTSD, I want to utilize each day. I want to incorporate something different as a means to help work on forgiveness. So during the 7 days, the first step is figure it out. Second day is release the effect. Third day is energize the space. Fourth day is experience the new energy. Fifth day, demonstrate forgiveness. Sixth day, observe the effects. And then the final day, seventh day, is moving forward. What we've done in the past was basically build affirmations throughout the day. It's not easy to forgive somebody or to receive forgiveness if you didn't already do it. So when you're struggling with it, it's easier to take things slow. And that was one of the feedback that I got from the group that did it the last time, that they like the approach of taking things slow rather than just jumping out and doing everything all at once and say, I forgive X, Y, or Z for whatever, and then just ended at that. So they like that it sort of broke things down over a 7 day period. How the program basically runs is I send an email out in the morning, early in the morning. Everything sort of goes off based off of Eastern Standard Time. So wherever you are, you could just flip it and utilize it for that time of the day that you have. So the email would be sent out. There's a short video talking about that specific day, and then it gives you a short worksheet to fill out for that specific day. So for example, the first day, figure it out. You basically define what forgiveness means to you. You start building your affirmations, and then there's a couple other questions. I don't want to give away everything all at once, but there's some days it's 1 page, some days it's 2 page, but it's pretty short and pretty straightforward. The video explains everything so that you could do whatever is on the worksheet or required on the worksheet to help. At the end of each day, I do a Zoom session with anyone who is interested in joining in. If they have any questions, it's not mandatory to join in on the Zoom sessions. It's just optional. If you feel like you want to talk more about it, if you want to go into a little bit more details about what that specific day entailed. And then now with this new addition, utilizing that Zoom session to talk a little bit more about whatever type of therapy that we talked about on that specific day. So again, I want to incorporate things like talk therapy or art. How do you utilize art, or how do you utilize music, or how do you utilize writing as a form of forgiveness? So adding those things into it. So this time it would just be a second video and a second worksheet that is attached to it. The worksheet would pretty much just be one aspect of it. The second worksheet would just be one question or one assignment that you have to do to complete that part of it. I would say the longest video I have is probably like 5 minutes in all of the 7 days. Right before I started, I usually send out like an intro video and intro email to the system, to the 7 days challenge. So you have an idea of what the 7 days looks like. What do you need? And basically all you need is just a couple minutes of your day and a book and a pen just to write. And then you just work from there throughout the 7 days.
Cool. Awesome. That sounds like a. And when does that start? When do you start?
On the 7th of January to the 13th of January.
Okay. So if you're interested and you're watching this, if you're interested, then look up this man and you will find it. Well, actually, if you can, we'll make sure you have the link for that as well. At least the name of it. And we'll put that out for you too. Actually, if you share a post on Instagram when you do the course, I will actually share that for you as well. I'll share it out on mine. Just that would be that's a good thing to do. Of course, forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of the three virtues of Taoism. Surprise. Kuan Yin, the Divine Mother, or the Taoist priestess in Taoism, the Buddhist or the goddess in Buddhism. But she has three virtues, and the three virtues are forgiveness, unconditional love, and gratitude. And within the Taoist psychology, or the Taoist way of living, that those three virtues are very, very powerful and very important. So, learning to forgive, activating unconditional love, and being finding gratitude within everything around you. So it's that sounds like an awesome course. Very cool. Okay, well, thank you very much, my friend. It's good to speak to you again.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to join you.
We'll have to do it again at some point next year, which is still that far away.
Yeah.
It'll be all good. So thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.
And thank you for taking this opportunity to host me on your program today. All those great sessions that we've had in the past, and I foresee even greater sessions in the future. So.
The whole point of this one, sit down with Sifu, is I have no idea who's going to turn up. I know there's anybody else, but the whole idea, they're always quite cool, always interesting. The other show I do, the Way of Conscious Mindfulness, that's actually a set show, and that's actually for the guest focus, But this one, we could talk about this. I've done 3 this week, and we've done. We talked about energy, we talked about the universe, we talked about health in Taoist or Chinese medicine point of view. We talked about different understandings with Dr. G Love, Dr. George Xavier Love, and then this one today. So awesome! I love it. They're great. So thank you, my friend. Thank you so much. Everybody else, hope you enjoyed this. Take care. See you again, probably next year. Until next time, bye for now. Love, Chi, and Shen. We're out.